Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 312, which goes down in Sydney, Australia on Saturday night. It looks like a really good card from top to bottom. I love these Australian cards because I love the Australian MMA scene. I think there's a lot of top fighters that come through. They're exciting, the game to fight. So, yeah, I'm excited. And of course, we've got two title fights as well. A rematch for the UFC Middleweight Championship, and then the return of Tatiana Suarez for the UFC Strawweight Championship as well. And that title fight for Suarez, again, we'll talk about it very soon, but it's definitely been a long time coming, so I'm definitely excited for that fight. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that likes the written breakdowns that explain the recommended bets, whether you're a fun gambler that likes the long shot parlays, or maybe you want to create your own parlay with our help and advice, we've got a section for you. Or if you're just somebody that wants to follow the official bets from the handicapper, which of course is myself, then we have that section for you as well. And of course, with every subscription package, you will receive the UFC prediction software from Bayes AI, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight on every UFC event. And that is exclusive to MMA Play 365. And all of our packages are super affordable, as well as our ethos is to make sure that you win the money back that you're spending with us as fast as possible so you can start profiting on your bets. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. With the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get breaking some fights down. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. It's for the UFC Middleweight Championship. It's a rematch. We've got Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland 2. And to be honest with you, I don't really see the fight playing out too much differently than the last time that these fighters met for two reasons, really. The first reason is the styles clash in exactly the same way as they clashed before. Both fighters don't really change how they fight. You know what to expect from both fighters when they step inside the cage. And then also the rematch, sometimes when you see a rematch and it's 3 or 4 years later and some fighters have changed, maybe some have declined or some have improved, or maybe one's declined, one stays the same, and one's improved, one stayed the same. But both Du Plessis and Strickland, they haven't changed since the last time they fought each other, which actually was only just over a year ago. So I'm not expecting too many differences for how the fight actually plays out. And even between the last time that they fought, Dricus Du Plessis went out there against Israel Adesanya, looked good against Adesanya and submitted him in round 4. Strickland, on the other side, he went to a 5-round... Well, it was a split decision, but it shouldn't have been a split decision. But he went to a 5-round decision with Paulo Costa. And yeah, look, Strickland looked like Strickland. The worrying side from that side with the fight, though, is Paulo Costa landed almost 160 strikes over 5 rounds against Strickland. Strickland, I think it was a little over 180, so he did outland him, but it wasn't the volume differential that I think a lot of people expected. I think a lot of people expected Strickland to be landing around that 180. I think that's absolutely fair to assume of Strickland, which is a compliment to him as well, because 180 strikes in a 5-round fight is a significantly high amount of strikes landed. But Strickland is at the top of one of the fights at the top of the division for a reason. The worrying side is that he's allowed that many strikes coming back from Paulo Costa, who typically doesn't do as well over 5 rounds. Definitely more of a 3-round fighter, can slow down as well. So the fact that Costa was putting up those sort of numbers across a full 5-round fight, a little bit of a concern. But coming back to this fight itself, the only thing that I think is going to change a little bit is the fact that, look, when these guys went to that decision, I bet Dricus Du Plessis. I think I got him at plus money, just like I got him at plus money against Adesanya and Trevin Giles as well. So I've enjoyed a little bit of plus money on Dricus Du Plessis in the UFC so far. But when they went to a decision, I thought that Dricus Du Plessis had edged it. Honestly, I thought he'd edged the fight. There was a lot of uproar because a lot of people thought Strickland won, which, to be fair, I'd never debate that too hard, because it was one of those fights that was that close that it could have gone either way. And if Strickland would have won it and I'd have lost my bet, I'd have understood as well. It is what it is. When it's a close fight, again, it's one of those fights where if you run it back, if you run that same fight back 10 times and have 3 different judges in those judges' seats, then you probably get a different outcome, different scorecards every single time. But on the night it was Du Plessis, I genuinely thought, if, gun to my head, if you asked me to pick a decisive winner out of those 2 fighters, I would have picked Du Plessis. But the only difference that I think is going to happen in this fight is I think Du Plessis is going to make it look a little bit cleaner than what he did last time in regards to edging the rounds out a little bit more decisively. So if we do get to the judges' scorecards, which I am anticipating it goes to the judges' scorecards, then I think it's a little more clearer that Du Plessis won the fight. Maybe we get a judge that still sees it Strickland's way, but I think from the majority of the public and the MMA fans' perspective, I think it's going to be one of those fights where we're like, yeah, okay, Dricus Du Plessis should win this. Let's hope that he doesn't get screwed by the decision type of job. So I do think Du Plessis is going to get his hand raised again. I do think it's going to be a little bit cleaner and more decisive than what it was last time, but I still expect the same things to happen. I still expect volume from Strickland. I still expect Strickland to take a round or 2 from Du Plessis. I still expect Du Plessis to be shooting takedowns, Strickland getting straight back up once he is taken down, just because Strickland's got this almost godlike takedown defense, although Du Plessis did manage to get him down multiple times in the last fight, but it's very difficult to hold Strickland down. I think if we see a massive evolution from Du Plessis, it'll be in that region of once the takedown happens, he will be able to control topside, but I do think there would have to be a significant level of improvement and, evolve in that topside grappling skill set from Du Plessis, because Strickland's so good defensively there. That's not a knock on Du Plessis. He's a phenomenal grappler, great submission grappler, dangerous front chokes. It's more of a compliment on Strickland's side to the fact that he is so good defensively. But all in all, I think the strikes are going to be pretty close. Maybe Strickland outlands him again, very slightly, but I do think we see more decisive rounds from Du Plessis. For those reasons, I'm picking Dricus Du Plessis to win this fight and still the UFC middleweight champion. And in the next fight in the co-main event, we've got our second title fight. This time we're in the women's strawweight division. We've got Weili Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. Now, I love this fight for so many reasons. First of all, Tatiana Suarez is finally getting that title shot that we've all expected for so many years, which I will go into a little bit about that very shortly in regards to why that title shot hasn't come. But yeah, look, this is a long time coming for Tatiana Suarez, who is a fighter that I think the majority of the MMA UFC fan base would say that she's probably been the best fighter from a skill set perspective and the most likely winner of a title fight since she first entered the UFC, and it just didn't materialize until right now, which again, I'll talk about very soon. Another reason why I love this title fight is because I think that, look, Suarez at any point in her career up until this point, she could have fought so many different champions. She could have fought a Rose Namajunas. She could have fought a Carla Esparza, a Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But I think that Weili Zhang is the best strawweight that we've had in this division in the history of the UFC. And she's still in a prime right now. So the fact that we get the Tatiana Suarez that is an absolute monster facing this version of Weili Zhang, I think is the absolute perfect fight from, a strength versus strength, skill set versus skill set of how good both of these fighters actually are. So it's a perfect time for both fighters to fight, but also from Suarez's perspective, if she'd gone out there and beaten a Rose Namajunas or a Carla Esparza, there has still been some question marks on, okay, well, they might be better fighters in the division. How would she fare against them? Well, if she comes into this fight and walks out of the cage with that UFC strawweight championship belt wrapped around her waist, then there's going to be absolutely no questions whatsoever about who is the best strawweight on planet Earth. So I love this fight. I love how it's been set up. And of course, I'll go into it with Tatiana Suarez. The big red flags and the question marks that you'll hear a lot of people talk about is the injury concerns. This is a fighter that has been in the UFC since 2016, so that's 9 years, and she's had 7 fights, which is extremely extremely inactive, an inactive fighter. There's a lot of inactivity there, and there's reasons for that. She's had injury problems, like bad injury problems as well. I think like her neck and her back. She's had problems to the point where she'll have a fight and then she'll be out for a year or two, and then she'll come back, she'll have another fight, she'll be out for a year, and we're just waiting for that consistency. And of course, it's not her fault. Injuries are a part of the sport, and some fighters are more lucky than others. Some fighters are more unlucky, and that's just the way it goes in the fight game. But I'm hoping that this time we've got a Tatiana Suarez that's fit, that's healthy, because to her credit, every single time that Tatiana Suarez comes back after an injury, it looks like she's never been away. She's always in shape. She never looks like flat or looks like there's any ring rust involved. She comes in there and she's dominant, and she absolutely dominates her opponents. That's why she's in this spot of a title fight, because she's, like I say, throughout the layoffs that she's had, she's never come back in and looked a little bit flat or had an off performance. She's just looked like an absolute beast. But I love this fight from a stylistic perspective, because look, Tatiana Suarez is predominantly a wrestler with a very heavy and a very high fight IQ ground game as well. And what I mean by that is, from the ground perspective, the grappling perspective, she's very heavy on top, but she's got a really good blend and mix of being heavy on top, being that blanket that can't be moved, to transition into a position where she can either look for a submission or land ground and pound. And whilst she's blending that together, being heavy and looking for those positions to attack, she doesn't leave herself too open for her opponent to try and scramble out of position or find a hole to, blast into to escape out. She's very secure while she's on top. So she's an absolute nightmare. Her wrestling's world class. Double legs, single legs, being able to, body lock her opponents, take them down. She's huge for the division. Very, very physically strong. So she doesn't normally have an issue of taking any of her opponents down, and she's got that wrestling background as well. Now, when she's on top, that topside grappling game really does complement how good she is as a wrestler. So from an MMA perspective, she's a nightmare to deal with from that wrestling and grappling side. Now with Weili Zhang, Weili's got also a very good wrestling and grappling game as well. And she's also very deceptively strong. Like, she doesn't look the physical specimen that what Suarez is. But when you hear her opponents talk about the first time they locked up with her in a clinch position, they were so surprised of how strong she actually was. And you can see it in the fights as well. She's got good wrestling herself, good grappling herself. She's also physical. The thing is with Weili is I kind of feel here that she's going to be the fighter that's not the more physical fighter, that's not got the better wrestling and grappling for a long time. Maybe since she came into the UFC, Weili's always been the fighter that's, imposing physically. She's always been the fighter that seems to be better from a wrestling and grappling perspective. Maybe aside from the Carla Esparza fight, but it's a fight that she still dealt with and won. But in this fight, I think she's going to be significantly at a disadvantage from a wrestling and grappling perspective, and potentially a physical perspective as well for the first time. So Weili Zhang's probably going to be dealing with, some new elements in this fight that she's not seen before. But where Weili is going to have an absolute, clear advantage in this fight is within the striking. I think she's going to be a significantly better striker than Tatiana Suarez. I think Suarez's striking, we have seen developments over the years. You can see that she's improving from fight to fight. But the bottom line is with Suarez is I kind of feel like the striking is always ever going to be just a means to close the distance, to get a hold of her opponents and take them down. And in between the moments where she's shooting takedowns, I think Weili Zhang's going to be landing good strikes on her. And I think Zhang will need to get off to a really quick start here to try and chip away at Suarez as quick as she possibly can, because I do feel that the longer this fight goes on, the more opportunities Suarez is going to get to close the distance, get a hold of Zhang and take her down. Now, when you're looking, I think the big question for me is when you're looking at this fight from a wrestling and grappling perspective, I think the determination of how successful Suarez is will determine if she wins or loses, because if Suarez doesn't get the takedown she needs, or if Zhang's getting straight back up, or, maybe it's just not there for Suarez on the night. If Suarez doesn't get this fight down to the mat often, or if she does get the fight down, she can't stay on top for too long, then I think that Weili Zhang's going to pull away with the strikes and really hurt Suarez the longer the fight goes on. But the thing is with Weili Zhang, you look at historically, Yan Xiaonan took her down 3 times. Yan Xiaonan has got absolutely nowhere near the wrestling and grappling of Tatiana Suarez. In fact, she's predominantly a striker that's got weaknesses in her wrestling and grappling herself. So if she's taking Weili Zhang down 3 times, then I think we can expect Suarez to. But then Carla Esparza took Weili Zhang down. Carla Esparza's a good wrestler and predominantly a wrestler as well. And then the other fighter to take Weili Zhang down was Rose Namajunas. Now, Rose Namajunas, I wouldn't say she's predominantly a wrestler or grappler. I'd say she's predominantly a striker, but with a good all-round game. But again, Tatiana Suarez is a different level of wrestler and grappler. So if Rose Namajunas is getting her down twice, then I think Suarez can. What I'm getting at here is I do think Suarez has got the style here to be successful. I do think that she's going to get chewed up on the feet a little bit in the in-between moments. But I do think that she gets the takedowns and the top side control that she needs in at least 3 of the 5 rounds. She just needs to not get finished from a striking perspective, which I think is, I think is fair to say that she's unlikely to get finished, although it's not impossible, if that makes sense. But I think Suarez stays out of any, sort of finishing opportunities for Weili Zhang. I think she does get a bit beaten up on the feet, but I think that she gets hold of Weili Zhang in at least 3 of the 5 rounds, gets the takedown she needs. And man, Suarez is so good on top. Even though Weili is a good grappler in her own right, even though she's a good wrestler in her own right, I'm not saying Suarez is going to hit every single takedown she attempts, but I think that she gets the takedowns and the top control time that she needs in, like I said, at least 3 of the 5 rounds to be able to make this fight quite decisive. I think it's going to be competitive because, like I say, Weili Zhang for me is going to have a huge striking advantage, but I think the style of Suarez, the game plan she's going to come up with, is going to come up trumps on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tatiana Suarez to win this fight and become the new UFC Women's Strawweight Champion. And in the next fight, this is going to be a good one. A banger in the heavyweight division. We've got the newcomer Tallison Teixeira versus Justin Tafa. And like I said, look, this fight's only going to last as long as it lasts. And I suppose we all said that last week about Sergey Pavlovich and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And, that went to a 3-round decision with Pavlovich suddenly being some Russian wrestler by surprise. So, look, I don't think this fight's going to be like that. Both fighters, I think, are going to come winging bombs and looking to knock each other's jaws into rosette. And Tallison Teixeira is a decent addition to the UFC, especially from a physical perspective. Look, the kid's 25, which, by the way, of a heavyweight, is like a young kid. Like, this guy's not going to hit his prime as a heavyweight until he's about maybe 33, 34. So he's got almost 10 years to hit his prime. He's 7-0. He's 6'7" with an 83-inch reach. So the kid's absolutely huge, but he's not huge, or at least he doesn't look huge from what I've seen, like stocky, like his thickness. He's just tall, he's long, but no mistake about it, even though he's not thick so much, he packs a decent amount of power in his strikes. Now, with Justin Tafa's going to be at a height and reach disadvantage here, but Justin Tafa's the type of fighter that's going to come forwards and wing bombs anyway. Like, it doesn't matter. I think that Tafa's significantly at a disadvantage with, the range and the reach, but he's going to come forwards. He's going to look to wing it to Teixeira. So the worries that I've got for Tafa is, as Tafa's coming forwards, Teixeira, I'm telling you, is going to have opportunities here for strikes up the middle, knees, straight punches, uppercuts, as Justin Tafa's coming in, because Tafa will come in and he'll be, maybe feinting a jab and then loading up on a big overhand to try and close that distance. But if Teixeira has really got his counter-striking down to a T here, I think there's definitely going to be weapons where he can knock Tafa out. So that's Teixeira's side. Now, from Tafa's perspective, look, I've seen Tallison Teixeira just brawl with some fighters in the cage, in the pocket, in boxing range, and the head movement is limited. Again, he's only 25, so it's stuff that he will be working on and will be fixing. So we could potentially see a more improved defensive version of Teixeira as he's improving as a fighter and as a striker within MMA. But from what I've seen in his previous fights, which is all you can go on, is the dude's hittable. The dude can be cracked, and he has been cracked a few times. Fortunately for Teixeira, I don't think he's been cracked with with a shot or with power that's significant enough to completely put his lights out, which is true and fair because he's 7-0, he's unbeaten. But Justin Tafa has that punch, has that power to knock him out. So I think that Tallison Teixeira has got to be very, very careful of the power that's coming back at him, because if he comes in here with the same type of, sort of strategy and the same type of fight that he's fought previous fights, and he's happy to brawl inside boxing range with little regard for his striking defense, I think Tafa's going to land something on him and knock him out. But I'm going to give Teixeira the benefit of the doubt that he's improving some aspects like that of his game. But not only that, even if he does have these defensive flaws, the dude's so long, I genuinely see Tafa rushing in here to land something on him and just getting caught with something big up the middle, like I say, like a knee or an uppercut, or maybe it's an elbow. If Teixeira steps to the side and lands an elbow as he's coming in, and Justin Tafa face plants the UFC canvas with one of those brutal knockouts, I can just envision this sort of fight playing out. So look, Justin Tafa might have his moments here, but I think Teixeira, with how tall he is, with the range, with the speed advantage that he's probably going to have, and the fact that Tafa will likely rush in recklessly, I think that Teixeira is going to find something. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tallison Teixeira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Jimmy the Brute Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. It's so good to see Jimmy Crute back. He's a fighter that I've had a soft spot for a while. Like, I've liked this kid since he came into the UFC. His style is really, really good. He's so well trained. He's still only 28 as well. So the fact that he retired after his last fight was an absolute shame, because again, he's a light heavyweight, so he's probably not going to peak within his prime till maybe like 32, 33. So he's probably got another 5 years before he hits his prime. To see him retire at 28, maybe all the motivation left him. And I did listen to an interview where he said that he couldn't see anything past a win, and when he did lose, he thought it was worthless if he wasn't winning. But now he's back fighting because he loves the sport. And look, it's all the same things that we've heard from other fighters that have retired before. But I think that Crute's going to be different because, like I say, he's 28 and he's got a really good skill set. He's kickboxing under Sam Greco. He's a BJJ black belt under Jean-Jacques Mercado, which is a legit BJJ black belt. The kid's just really, really good. It's a shame that he's on a losing streak. It's a shame that things have played out as they've played out. Like, he hasn't won in his last 4 fights. He's got 1 draw in there as well, 3 losses. And yeah, look, his last fight wasn't a great look against Menefield, getting guillotined, but look, his head clearly wasn't in that right space. He wasn't right to be in the cage at this level, it seems. So I'm hoping the time that he's took to sort of get his head back level, get around the right people in his life, start training, find a love of the sport again, I'm hoping it really reignites him, because if we see a Jimmy Crute like what we saw a number of years ago when he first came into the UFC, then that version of Jimmy Crute absolutely runs through Rodolfo Bellato. But onto Bellato, this guy's stoic. You can see he's tough, he's rigid, he hits hard, but he can be got at. And you look at the Iho Potieri fight, like Potieri, another referee in that fight stops that fight, and Rodolfo Bellato loses via TKO to Iho Potieri, which, no disrespect to Iho Potieri, is one of the most entertaining fighters in the division on the roster, but he isn't a fighter that he's going to go anywhere close to like the top 15, top 20, top 30. Like, this is a fighter that will do a really good job and entertain the crowd at a certain level in the UFC. He's a UFC caliber fighter. I'm not going to take that from him. But again, he's not a fighter that's going to surge to the top of the division. So I think what Rodolfo Bellato sort of experienced against Iho Potieri doesn't really age too well for him. And again, you put Jimmy Crute in that position. If Crute hurts Bellato and Bellato goes down, Crute won't let Bellato off like that. It'll be a choke, or he'll finish the fight with ground and pound. And again, Iho Potieri probably would have had more opportunities, but he gassed himself out by trying to finish Bellato, throwing so many strikes. However, the plus side of Bellato is, like I say, he's a good striker. He's a good serviceable fighter in the division. And the worry that I've got with him fighting Jimmy Crute from Crute's perspective is that, again, Crute is coming back from this retirement at 28 years old. He hasn't won a fight in X amount of years. He's on a 4-fight, not losing streak 'cause he's got a draw in there, but he's on a 4-fight skid, shall we say. And, what does happen in this fight if Bellato does hit Jimmy Crute with that hard shot that wobbles Crute? Does all those previous thoughts and that previous mentality suddenly come rushing in, and then suddenly Crute's no longer able to focus and deal with being hurt and trying to shake off the cobwebs and come back? Does he just crash and, I don't want to say give up or quit, but does he just crash and, accept that the fight's going to be over? Is that fight still in him if he gets hurt and rocked? Because that's what nobody's going to know, including Jimmy Crute. We don't know once Crute gets rocked if all the those previous the bad energy, the bad thoughts is going to come back. But look, from a skill set versus skill set perspective, I think Jimmy Crute's the better fighter. Striking wise, it's close. I do think Bellato holds the power advantage and the durability advantage. But if Crute can get takedowns here and get on top of Bellato's not a bad grappler, but I think Crute will be at a different level on the mat. And I think that he'll be able to cause problems to Bellato on the mat. But I think on the feet, like I say, Crute technically, in my opinion, is the better striker. It's just, like I say, the durability and the power slightly leans over to Bellato. So the feet's going to be close. It could be a bit of a chess match, a little bit worrying for Crute if he's eating too many shots. But I think Crute's got a couple of paths to victory, because I still think Crute could win a 15-minute kickboxing fight against Bellato. And then if he's mixing in the wrestling and grappling, I think he's going to be better down there as well. So, like I said, there are some concerns with Crute for the reasons that I've mentioned, but I am going to side with him in this fight because I do think skill for skill is a better fighter. For those reasons, I'm picking Jimmy Crute to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. And I love this fight. Like, for a start, we don't know what we're going to get from Jake Matthews, which we never really know what we're going to get from Jake Matthews. He's one of these fighters. He's really strange because he's actually a really good fighter and very well-rounded as well. Like his striking sound, his wrestling sound, his grappling sound. He's got good cardio and he's physically strong as well. Like he's built into this division like a freight train. Like he's big. You can tell he's physically big and physically strong. So Jake Matthews as a fighter has got a really good skill set. The issue with Matthews is form and consistency. Like over his last 7 fights, he's won, lost. He's trading wins and losses, and his last one, by the way, was a win, so surely we're expecting a loss, right? But no, like in all seriousness, he trades wins and losses, that's a fact. So the consistency is just not there, but he's one of these fighters where I feel when you expect him to win, he loses, and when you expect him to lose, he wins. So he's very difficult to analyse and predict what we're going to get from Matthews because we really won't truly know until he steps inside the cage. So when you're making a prediction or a pick on a Jake Matthews fight, or maybe you're even betting a Jake Matthews fight, you have to heavily weight on who he's fighting, the opponent. Now in this case, it's Francisco Prado. Now this is a kid that's 22 years old, and I like this kid a lot. I think he's entertaining, he's game to fight. He's tough, he's durable. You cut him and, make a bloody mess of him and he's still going to come forwards looking to strike. Now, that fight against Zellhuber last time out, look, Zellhuber, in my opinion, is a really good striker. And Prado beat him on 2 out of the 3 judges' scorecards in round 1. And then obviously that cut happened on the eye round 2, and that sort of seemed to be the beginning of the end for Prado. But even though Prado, at 21 years old at the time, was bloodied up, cut up, crowd going mental for his opponent, Francisco Prado still stood his ground, still kept throwing. He didn't quit on himself. He didn't allow Zellhuber to put an absolute clinic on him. Prado was still competitive. Yes, he lost the next 2 rounds and lost the fight, but man, Prado fought till the end. I like this kid a lot. The weakness that he's got in his game, at least from what we've seen so far, is the wrestling and grappling. He came in on short notice to the UFC, fought Jamie Mullarkey, who's a UFC veteran. Mullarkey used his wrestling to get 3 takedowns, smothered him topside, and Prado really didn't have any answers to being able to get back up to his feet, or, maybe he was looking for submissions that weren't there. But again, that's the young kid inexperience thinking that you're probably going to be able to catch a triangle or an armbar against a UFC vet in the UFC, which is very, very unlikely. It's not what it is like on the regional scene. So that's lessons for Prado to learn. Do we give Prado a pass for it being a short notice debut against a fighter like Jamie Malarkey? Then, maybe we do give him a pass, but we're not really going to know what that ground game's like until we see this fight, because I genuinely think Prado's going to smack Jake Matthews with some hard shots, and Matthews is if his game plan is to come in and wrestle and grapple, that's what we'll see anyway. But if his game plan is to strike, I think it'll change pretty quickly once Prado starts coming forwards, putting the pressure on Matthews and landing, and then we're going to see what Prado's defensive wrestling and grappling looks like. The other thing I like from Prado's side is he is training at American Top Team now in Florida, the main American Top Team, so he's going to have so many good training partners, so many good looks from that wrestling and grappling perspective, so he can improve defensively. Is it going to be enough from his previous fights to right now to be able to stop Matthews from taking him down and Matthews laying on top? Again, it remains to be seen. But you've got to... Look, Prado's got a decent grappling game. You've got to imagine that he can tailor that to be able to stand back up to his feet. And I think on the feet, he's going to cause Matthews a problem just because of how hard he is, how aggressive he is. And like I say, Matthews is so inconsistent, so we don't really know what to expect from him. If he's on his on night, he probably gets it done, but I still think Prado's going to be live in that case. If he's on an off night, then I think Prado wipes the floor with him, if I'm being honest. You look at the Matthews-Semmelsberger fight. Semmelsberger dropped Matthews hard 3 times and actually won that fight just because he dropped Matthews. Matthews was doing well in the in-between, but you get dropped in 3 rounds, you're going to lose a fight. So I kind of think Prado, he's got no fear, he's aggressive, he comes forwards, he'll eat your punch to land his own combinations and his own hard punches. For Matthews to really stop Prado and win, he's got to be able to take him down either consistently or take him down once per round and have that, that longevity on top of him, the minutes on top of Prado. But again, Prado's a young kid, he's going to be developing, and he's already had a decent a decent attacking grappling game. He's got to be able to mix that defensively. I'm going to take the chance on Prado here. I'm picking Francisco Prado to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jack Jenkins versus Gabriel Santos. Now, this sucks from a fan perspective for me anyway, because I love both of these fighters. Jack Jenkins, super entertaining, probably one of the hardest low kicks in the game. He's won multiple fights by breaking his opponent's legs with low kicks. And then you've got Gabriel Santos on the other side, and I've loved this kid ever since I watched footage of him before he came into the UFC. As he came in to fight, I think it was Lerone Murphy on his debut, a fight where I actually think Gabriel Santos beat Lerone Murphy, by the way. It wasn't a robbery, it was close enough, for me to accept that Gabriel Santos, did lose that fight, but I had Gabriel Santos winning, and I like him a lot. The dude's aggressive. He's got good takedowns. He blends the striking with the wrestling in really well. His MMA game is solid. Now, with Jack Jenkins on the other side, Jenkins has got, like I say, that weapon of his low kick where, if he gets at Gabriel Santos early in this fight and hits Gabriel Santos with 3 or 4 of those low kicks and gets Santos limping a little bit and feeling it and the legs swelling, then what that's going to do is that's going to take a lot of the movement away from Santos, and it's also going to prevent Santos exploding into these takedown attempts where, look, we've seen Jack Jenkins stuck a little bit on bottom, not like it's this huge, massive problem, but Jamal Emmers was on top of him for a little bit and won rounds because of the top control time, and Jenkins didn't really show that urgency to get back up to his feet. But again, Jenkins is young, and it's one of those fights where, what happened with the Jamal Emmers fight? Yeah, he took the win eventually, but he'll look back at that fight and think, well, shit, that's what I need to improve. But the thing is, if he hasn't improved on that, then Gabriel Santos, I think, is going to have a comfortable time against him, because if the takedowns do come from Santos, I think Santos's topside grappling game will be too much for Jenkins to be able to, sort of learn on the spot in the middle of the fight and try and stand up there. Jenkins has got to have gone back to, the drawing board with that defensive grappling, just so at least he can get back up to his feet. If he's taken down, fine. But as long as you can get back up to your feet, unless you're fighting like a Merab Dewalishvili that is going to constantly hit you with takedowns throughout an entire fight, then as long as you can get up from a couple of takedowns, you can have an opportunity to, to then work your striking, which, again, look, I'm torn on this fight, if I'm being honest. I think from And it's going to come down to this, by the way, and I say it a lot. When I'm torn on a fight that I think is very close either way, more often than not, I'm going to side with the underdog. And that brings me to the other point. In regards to the betting line, I think the line's way too wide. Gabriel Santos, at the time of recording this, it's like a minus 225, minus 230 favourite, with Jack Jenkins around plus 180, plus 190 in some spots. So I think the line's way too wide. It should be much closer. I agree with Santos being the favourite, but when it comes to a pick, because the line's so wide, I'm going to side with the side that I think has got the most value from a betting perspective, because after all, this is a betting related podcast. So yeah, look, I think for Jenkins to win, he's got to really, he's got to be able to get back up to his feet from takedowns, but he's got to really land on Santos's leg and really bust that leg up early. And then he can let his hands go after that, which we've seen Gabriel Santos be a little bit vulnerable, especially when he was knocked out against David Anama. So yeah, I think Santos can be got at, but he is very good offensively, and that's what's going to make for a good fight. But like I say, I think it's a close and competitive fight. I think there's genuine paths to victory on both sides, and on the line that I think is too wide, I'm going to side with the underdog that's an underdog, a little bit too big of an underdog, if that makes sense. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jack Jenkins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tom Nolan versus Viacheslav Borshchev. Now, when I got into watching tape on this fight, I was Tom Nolan's an underdog. So I was very like, okay, well, Tom Nolan's huge. He's like 6'3", 6'4", whatever he is. He's absolutely huge. He's aggressive. He's explosive. It's the flying knees, powerful elbows, straight punches. I thought, yeah, look, I really like this guy as an underdog against Borshchev, who, let's be honest, Borshchev got dropped by Chase Hooper, which, no disrespect to Chase Hooper, but Chase Hooper's a predominant grappler who's not known for dropping people. So, look, Chase Hooper absolutely battered Borshchev once he dropped him as well. So, having all this in my mind, I thought, well, yeah, look, Tom Nolan's the side here, like 100%, and from a betting perspective as well. But actually, the more I looked into the fight, the more tape that I watched, I'm just not as confident that Tom Nolan is going to be safe in this fight, because the one thing that Borshchev will absolutely bring to the cage is elite level striking, especially offensively. It's hard to say he's elite level defensively, because like I say, it's, he's probably going to have to prove himself for another couple of fights before that comes back after the Chase Hooper fight. But look, it's not the first time Borshchev was dropped hard by someone as well. Like Nazim Sadikov had him hurt and cut up badly as well. So yeah, Borshchev's got a bit of a history defensively, striking, but offensively, like the dude's like an elite level striker, elite level kickboxer. He's got plenty, I think it's like over 200 fights kickboxing outside of MMA. So the guy is like I say, a high level striker. And the thing is with Tom Nolan, he's also been hurt a couple of times, but Nolan's reckless, like really reckless when he comes forwards. Like he's got no regard for defensive striking whatsoever. So I've got a funny feeling that, look, the fight could be on a little bit of a knife edge about who gets knocked out, especially when they're both crashing forwards and attacking each other, because they've both got some holes within the striking defense. But I think that the better quality striker, the more experienced striker in that type of fight is more likely to come up on top than not. So when they're crashing forwards, yeah, Borshchev could be vulnerable defensively, but I think the fact he's so offensive, so good offensively from a technical standpoint, that he's more likely to find the gaps through the defensive holes than Nolan is on him, because he's the better offensive striker. I hope that makes sense. It definitely does in my head what I'm trying to explain. So I basically, yeah, they're both defensively flawed a little bit from a striking perspective, but I think Borshchev, because he's so much better from a technical standpoint offensively, he's more likely to find the holes on Nolan than Nolan is on him, even though it's possible for Nolan to find the hole on Borshchev and knock him out. So look, I think it's a volatile fight 100%, but I do have to side with the fighter that I think is the better striker when both fighters are defensively flawed a little bit. For those reasons, I'm picking Viacheslav Borshchev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cong Wang versus Bruna, Brasil. Now, a lot changed in the last fight for both of these ladies. Like, from Cong Wang's perspective, she was a fighter that I don't even know what the betting line was. I'm sure it'll have been somewhere around like minus 1,000 or even wider. Cong Wang against Gabriela Fernandez. Now, Gabriela Fernandez is an okay striker. She's a decent striker. That's where she's predominantly best. And she has weaknesses in her wrestling and grappling. So, I think everybody, when they were breaking this fight down, was saying, well, yeah, look, the line's wide for an MMA fight in general, but Cong Wang's going to be the better striker here, where Gabriela Fernandez is strongest. Cong Wang's going to have a massive wrestling and grappling advantage over Gabriela Fernandez. So, that's why the line was that wide, because the paths to victory for Cong Wang were just there, but they were there everywhere, no matter where the fight went. The issue is, what you can't account for is when your fighter is looking absolutely phenomenal and then just gets cracked hard, dropped, and then the fight just changes within an absolute click of the fingers, which is exactly what happened in that fight. Cong Wang was looking absolutely outstanding. She was looking like the better fighter than what she is, but then she got caught. She hit hard and then ended up getting choked out by Gabriela Fernandez when she couldn't recover. So an absolutely crazy outcome to that fight, and one that I don't think anybody expected. And then on the other side, Bruna Brasil's taken a turn for the better. Like, she was a fighter that, look, she had a little bit of hype in the Contender Series, and then when she came into the UFC, she was trading wins and losses and kind of didn't look like the fighter that we thought she was going to be. But then she moves over to the Fighting Nerds, that gym in Brazil with like Caio Barraio and the rest of that crew that are just absolutely on a heater, and they were the entire last year. Like, this is a gym that's really changing fighters in the UFC for the better. So then Bruna Brasil goes to Fighting Nerds. Then she fights Molly McCann. Bruna Brasil's a massive underdog, but she dominates Molly McCann, lands more strikes than her, gets more takedowns, has more top control time. Bruna Brasil looked absolutely phenomenal, and I still think Molly McCann's a fighter that's got good qualities and is a UFC caliber fighter. So for Bruna Brasil to do that to Molly McCann, again, as a big underdog, she, that just boosted her trajectory massively. So now you've got two fighters where Bruna Brasil is changed for the better in regards to now she's a much improved and much more developed fighter, at least what it seems from her last fight, because she looked nothing like she did in the previous fights in the UFC. Then you've got Cong Wang, who's coming off a loss where everyone expected her to win as a massive favourite, but I kind of think that doesn't really paint the full picture of Cong Wang. I don't feel that it was one of those performances where Cong Wang went in and got absolutely dominated from bell to bell. Like, Cong Wang was looking phenomenal. She just got caught and finished, which, this is MMA, that happens. If Cong Wang went into that fight and Gabriela Fernandez was out voluming her, landing more strikes than her, scoring takedowns on her, then you'd be saying, okay, well, Cong Wang's been massively overhyped and she's not the fighter we thought she was, and she's now being found out. Cong Wang was looking phenomenal until she was just caught, which, like I say, that can happen to any fighter. Look at last weekend with Israel Adesanya and Nassourdine Imavov. Adesanya was looking unbelievable, as good as ever, sharp, accurate, headstrong, everything was perfect until that one overhand right landed and knocked him out. So it happens in the sport. I still think Cong Wang's a really exciting prospect. I still think that she's going to be a nightmare for most of these fighters. Kickboxing background, but she's got really good wrestling and grappling as well. I do think she's the better fighter than Bruna Brasil. I know we were shocked last time out, but that's the MMA game. It happens, and Cong Wang was looking phenomenal before it happened, which is the main point of takeaway that you should be taking away from that fight. And coming back to this fight, I think Wang is going to be the better striker. I think if the fight hits the mat with the wrestling and grappling, I think Cong Wang will be absolutely fine down there as well, and will probably have advantages over Bruna Brasil down there. Also, for those reasons, I'm picking Cong Wang to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two debutants. We've got Aleksandre Topuria versus Colby Thicknesse. Now, I'm absolutely gutted here because Aleksandre Topuria was supposed to fight Cody Haddon, and I loved that fight because the UFC were basically finding out how good Aleksandre Topuria actually is. And from my perspective, the question I was asking is Aleksandre Topuria only in the UFC because his brother, Ilia Topuria, is one of the best fighters on planet Earth and a current UFC champion? So it's a legitimate question, and I think it's a fair question to ask. But then when you look at the record of Aleksandre Topuria, yeah, his last win was against a 3-1 fighter in WOW, which I believe is a Spanish promotion. But then before that, he fought a guy who was 1-9. Then he beat somebody who was 7-18. Then he lost against somebody that was 0-0. Then he won against somebody that was 1-1, 0-3. So look, the level of competition that Topuria's been fighting, Aleksandre Topuria, is very, very weak. So I think it was absolutely a fair question to ask is this dude genuinely good and he's just beating the fighters that he's put in front of him, which is all you can do as a fighter. You can only beat what's in front of you inside the cage that's trying to knock your head off as well. So is Aleksandre Topuria genuinely a good fighter and just doing what he needs to do against these fighters? Or is he a fighter that still needs a lot of work and development that's been rushed into the UFC because his brother is a current UFC champion? And the thing is with the Cody Haddon fight, we were absolutely going to find that out because Cody Haddon is a legit fighter, legit prospect, good boxing, good wrestling, good grappling. We were going to find out in that fight exactly where Aleksandre Topuria is at, but Haddon unfortunately pulled out. In comes Colby Thicknesse. Now, Colby Thicknesse is 7-0, so at least from a record perspective, Aleksandre Topuria, it looks like it's a step up in competition for him, which is great. But from a stylistic perspective, it looks like a very... well, at least a much more simpler... well, it's definitely going to be a simpler fight than what Cody Haddon will have been for him. But I also think Aleksandre Topuria, with his style, I think it's going to be good enough to beat Colby Thicknesse. And I just don't think the fight's going to be as competitive and the opponent being as strong as what I wish it was going to be for Topuria, because I really just wanted to find out if Topuria was legit or not, and that Cody Haddon fight would have definitely found out. So yeah, like I say, a bit disappointed about that. But look, how they match up, like with Aleksandre Topuria, he seems to really like cock that right hand at his chin, a little bit like for your old school UFC fans, Dan Henderson. So Dan Henderson used to do this all the time. He used to lead with his jab, throw, jab, 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 and he would have that right hand cocked and ready to throw at any one time. And then when he threw it like a missile, like an absolute bomb, and he had power as well. Now, Topuria doesn't have the power that Dan Henderson had, but he fights in a very similar way with that right hand. He keeps the right hand cocked, ready to unload it, and that seems to be the game changer shot for him. But by doing that, you look for it a little bit too much and you're over-reliant on it, and everything seems to be centered around that, which shouldn't be too difficult to game plan around, although a lot of Dan Henderson's opponents in the UFC will absolutely disagree with that. But at least from Colby Thicknesse's perspective, he knows what to watch out for. That right hand, it's being cocked, it's being loaded and ready to throw. So I do think that Topuria needs to work a little bit around that in regards to just, engaging with the right hand a little bit more, so it's not just waiting to unload on the one big shot and hope that it lands. But Topuria's got a decent wrestling game, it seems, and also a decent topside grappling game with some nasty ground and pound. Like, that aspect of his style is very similar to that of his brother's. Obviously, just not as, high level, because his brother is a UFC champion. I think it's fair to say that. But I think from that perspective, Aleksandre Topuria, his striking can be dangerous, and it will give, a sort of cause a little bit of hesitancy for his opponent, because they're watching that right hand and just wait. They don't know when it's going to be thrown, but they know it's going to be dangerous when it is. And then if he doesn't throw it and just level changes while they're over fixating on that right hand that's staying up and ready, then he can get takedowns and land ground and pound and submissions and whatnot. So that's Aleksandre Topuria. Colby Thicknesse, on the other hand, Thicknesse seems to have a little bit of a weird merge of styles. So what I mean by that is he likes to get fights down to the mat, and his wrestling's actually not that bad. But what you normally find with a fighter that's good with blending the strike into the wrestling, exactly what I've just mentioned with Topuria there, it's the boxing, it's the hands to close the distance, to get close, and then shoot a takedown. But the thing is with Thicknesse, he seems to prefer his kicks to his hands. So now Thicknesse has got to deal with, look, you only kick on the outside. You don't want to be kicking in boxing range because you risk getting knocked out. But you need to be in the boxing range to start your you're looking for your entries into your takedowns. So that's where there's a little bit of clash of the styles that Colby Thicknesse brings to the cage, because he's kicking from the outside, but then he's got a level change into a takedown, and he's level changing from too far out. And on the regional scene, he gets some of them. He doesn't get all of them, which is a concern, because if he's not doing that on the regional scene, then he's surely going to have problems in the UFC. But he shoots from too far out, and he does get some of them, admittedly, but again, in the UFC, it's going to be more difficult to do. And again, I don't think Topuria is going to get caught out by that, which is why I think Topuria is a big favourite in this fight, because Thicknesse will be kicking from the outside, and then he's going to be shooting from too far out to try and get Topuria down. And Thicknesse might not be the better wrestler in this fight. So I think stylistically, it's a good fight for Topuria here. land the punches, jab, 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 big overhand right, level change into a takedown, get thickness down, land some ground and pound, look for a submission. I think stylistically it favours Topuria. So for those reasons, I'm picking Aleksandre Topuria to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cody Steele making his UFC debut versus Rongzhu. And I think this is a really clever fight from the UFC because they're going to provide a fighter for Cody Steele that is going to be absolutely game, that's going to want to be in his face, that's going to want to be aggressive on him, and therefore it's going to be somewhat of a test for Cody Steele on his UFC debut. But on the flip side of that, Rongzhu is beatable against the right opponent. And I think Cody Steele is that type of opponent. So although Cody Steele's going to have to mind his P's and Q's here, and he's going to have to be careful that he don't get too reckless and into a brawl with someone like Rongzhu, who can land hard punches and who is going to try and be aggressive at every opportunity. Cody Steele's got a good fight here where I kind of think Rongzhu is going to bring the absolute best out of him in regards to the striking, the wrestling and the grappling. Look, Cody Steele's a legit BJJ black belt. He's got good wrestling background to go with it as well. And then, like I say, his striking, he can be hittable. That's his one weakness, in my opinion, from a defensive striking perspective. I think Rongzhu will land on him, but Steele looks like he's got a chin of steel, pun intended, I suppose. But also, Steele will take those big shots and he'll come forward, and the pressure that he applies, he'll eat your best punch and then take 2 steps forward, and that's got to be mentally draining for the opponent inside the cage. It's got to break you a little bit mentally when you've just delivered a few hard shots and your opponent's still coming forwards and putting the pressure on you. I think it's going to tire Rongzhu out the longer the fight goes on. I think takedowns are going to be there for Steele. I think the ground and pound's going to be there. The submission opportunities are going to be there. So I think that it's a fight where, like I've already said, Rongzhu is going to have moments early on, and he's going to test Cody Steele a bit, but it's also a perfect fight to feed Cody Steele into the UFC, make him look good, because I think Rongzhu is going to bring the best out of him, and then Cody Steele hype train can continue, and then I think the slow build is going to happen in the UFC with this kid. As for the fight right now on Saturday night, I'm picking Cody Steele to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kevin Jousset versus Jonathan Mikalev. And Jonathan Mikalev making his UFC debut. So for those that haven't watched him, don't know too much about Mikalev. Mikalev's actually a really entertaining fighter. He's aggressive. He comes forwards. He'll throw at his opponents. Definitely more on the front foot than on the back foot. And what I mean by that is I think defensively it can be got at a little bit, but man, like Jonathan Mikalev is a fighter that will look for the clinch specifically. So he'll come forwards, he'll land what he needs to land, crash into the pocket, clinch his opponents, and then he'll look to trip them down to the mat where he's got a decent grappling game. But the issue that Mikalev's going to face in this fight, and it's very strange because I don't think there's many fighters that have the type of style that Kevin Jousset's got in regards to the high-level judo. So with Mikalev, he's absolutely reliant on being better in the clinch, stronger in the clinch, and then getting the trips down to the mat. But the thing is with Kevin Jousset, he's a high-level judo practitioner, so his hips and his strength inside the clinch is going to be mega. And also, Jousset is going to be the fighter that's going to be the better fighter looking for, the better judo guy looking for the trips and the throws. So everything that Mikalev is good at and where he wins his fights, Jousset has got him matched, in my opinion, and is likely going to be better in those areas than Mikalev. So unfortunately for Mikalev, his advantages that he normally has in every other fight aren't going to be as prominent here. And he's probably fighting one of maybe a handful of guys in the division that he wouldn't want to fight stylistically. And I think that's the reason why Kevin Jousset is going to have success in this fight, because Jousset can then start unloading on the kickboxing, the striking, knowing that if Mikalev comes in and crashes into the pocket and clinches up with him, Jousset is going to have advantages there. And again, from a mentality perspective inside the cage, the longer the fight goes on, the more it's likely to break Mikalev, knowing that he's trying to succeed with his style, but unfortunately his opponent's just better than him in the one area that Mikalev's really good. So yeah, I think stylistically it's a fight that favours Jousset because of that judo. He'll be able to nullify what Mikalev brings to the cage in regards to his main strengths, and then Jousset can apply his own game after that, start with the kickboxing, start lighting Mikalev up a little bit. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Jousset to win this fight. And in the next fight, another Australian newcomer, we've got Keelan Salkild versus Anshul Jubilee. Now, I'm gutted that Sal Killed's like a minus 400 favourite. I was praying that that the bookies got this one wrong and that Sal Killed was like under minus 200, or maybe they got it completely wrong and had him down at a pick'em, or maybe even an underdog and it was Christmas Day. But the fact that he's a minus 400 favourite, really, I think the line's a little bit too wide, if I'm being honest, with it being his UFC debut. But at the same time, if you were asking me to line it myself, I would probably be having Sal Killed like minus 275, minus 300 in this specific fight. I think Sal Killed has got a little bit of work to do in regards to his skill set, but man, the kid's good. Like, he's a good striker, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler. Where his weaknesses and where I think he needs to work on is if he's the one that's put on his back, he can spend a little bit too much time guard playing before he actually reacts to being on his back and then either gets back up to his feet or hits a sweep or uses a submission as a distraction to get back up to his feet. Sometimes he can have wasted 2.5, 3 minutes before he does that, and then it's playing catch up in the round that he's not going to be able to catch up in. But when this guy gets on top, and look, he can strike into his wrestling really well, and then when he gets on top of his opponents, he's a nightmare to deal with. So I think Sal Killed's a fighter that is definitely one to watch. Like I say, I'm gutted that the bookies have hit this one with the nail on the head, because I was hoping they fucked up a little bit to take advantage of it. But look, Anshul Jubilee, he's not a bad striker, wrestler. He's got a good all-round game. I was going to say grappler after that as well. We've seen predominantly before he came to the UFC, he was more of a striker, but the closer he got to the UFC, and then in the UFC, we've seen that he's got a wrestling game as well, where he can get on top of his opponents. He's tall and he's long, and he can be a little bit of a problem on top. But I just think he's absolutely outgunned in this fight, because on the feet striking, I think Sal Killed's more dangerous. I think he's a better quality striker. I think Jubilee will have his moments for sure. Like, it's not going to be a whitewash in my opinion, but he'll have some moments. But I think Sal Killed's going to be the more dangerous striker, the more overwhelming striker here. And then when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think if Jubilee tries to take Sal Killed down, look, maybe that's where Jubilee gets at him in this fight, because we have seen Sal Killed play guard. But I just feel that Sal Killed's probably not going to allow Jubilee to spend too much time on top if he does get on top. And then when it comes to the offensive wrestling and grappling, I just think Sal Killed's better. And this is where I think Jubilee's outgunned. I think the only way that Jubilee wins this fight outside of a flash KO, which of course can happen in any fight, is if Jubilee gets Sal Killed down and Sal Killed does play guard too much, with the inexperience in his career at this point, maybe that's how Jubilee gets it in. But I think that it's a low percentage outcome, just like I think the flash KO is a low percentage outcome. So for those reasons, I'm picking Killan Sal Killed to win this fight. And last but not least, we've got Hyun Sung Park versus Nyam Jargal Tumen Dembarel. Nyam Jargal Tumen Dembarel is probably the only long, crazy name in the UFC that for some reason I'm comfortable pronouncing, although I'm definitely not going first name and second name. We'll just stick to Tumen Dembarel. But look, Tumen Dembarel is a fighter for me that I kind of feel like is going to be a bit like Daniel Lacerda, Daniel Da Silva, whatever you want to call him, if you remember that guy who fought Edgar Chairez 103 times. So the reason why I'm saying that is because Daniel Lacerda was a fighter that was super entertaining and that had a seriously good skill set, but was a little bit too flawed in regards to his style, to the point where he's going to be an absolutely entertaining fight no matter who you see him fight, where you see him fight, but probably might not rack up too many wins in the UFC. And I'm kind of feeling that Tumen Dembarel is going to be a little bit like that, because, look, this guy for a flyweight is big, he's powerful, and he's aggressive and he's reckless and he's everything that you want to see inside the cage in regards to an entertaining style. He will absolutely try and be the bully 100% of the time inside the cage. The problem is his flaw and his hole is within his defensive wrestling and grappling, which he can be got at. And I think that that's going to be his problem in the UFC. If he fixes his defensive wrestling and can get back up to his feet without showing his back, I think that he'd be a real prospect in the division. But whilst he's still got those holes in his games, I kind of feel like he's going to be too flawed to win too many fights at this level in the UFC. And the thing is with Hyun Sung Park, I don't really think that Hyun Sung Park is this ultra exciting prospect himself. Like he's sound everywhere. He's sound striker, wrestler, grappler. Like I don't mean anything negative by saying he's not a super hype prospect, but I just think he's your run of the mill UFC standard outside the top 15 caliber fighter, if that makes sense. So he's absolutely UFC caliber, but I just don't think he's a fighter that's going to surge into the top of the division. So Tumen Dembarel should be beating guys like Hyun-Sung Park. The thing is, with Hyun-Sung Park, he's got a really tricky grappling game. And specifically, if he takes his opponents down, which he absolutely can do, he's got a very good ability of taking the back. And once he's on the back, he locks up a body triangle and it's super difficult to get out of it. Like he's got a real good backpack. Now, the issue with Tumen Dembarel, and I've alluded to this a little bit earlier on if you're listening closely, is with his defensive grappling, he shows his back like every time. Every time he tries to stand back up to his feet, he gets on his knees and he shows his back. And I'm telling you now, Park's going to jump on that back. It's going to be Christmas time for Park. He's going to jump on the back, lock up a body triangle, and Tumen Dembarel's going to be able to do nothing for the rest of the round unless he's submitted and then the round's over. So that's where the problem is. I think on the feet striking, Tumen Dembarel's got every chance of knocking Park out. And I mean that with every last word that I'm saying. Like, Tumen Dembarel's super aggressive, comes forward, lands hard punches. I mean, the dude dropped Carlos Hernandez hard. So if he's doing that to him, I think that he's going to have big problems for Park on the feet. It's just Park's, I just don't know how much Park takes of that before he level changes and takes Tumen Dembarel down, or maybe Tumen Dembarel's over aggressive and he slips over or loses his balance and then Park gets on him and then Tumen Dembarel shows his back and Park's took the back. So I just feel that Tumen Dembarel on his back, then showing his back, and then Park getting on his back is going to be the series of is going to be the cause of the win and the loss of the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Hyun-Sung Park to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, as I say every single week, thank you for everybody tuning in. Thank you for everybody that downloads the podcast from the podcast platforms. Thank you to everybody that jumps onto YouTube, subscribes to our channel, and drops a comment as well. The comments always adhere to YouTube's algorithm, so the video and the podcast is seen by more people, which is absolutely what we want. And again, as always, if you're not an ass and you have something legitimate to say and you're not just trying to stir things or cause trouble, then please drop a comment onto the YouTube channel. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who we disagree on. Always happy to have a general conversation between two good minds. And one more time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler on there. Everything's super affordable. You get AI included from our AI software, which is the UFC prediction software from Bayes AI, and you also get all the handicapper betting advice as well, long-term gamblers section with written breakdowns, official bet section, fun parlay and parlay builder sections as well. So we've got everything on there that any UFC fan would need when it comes to betting on this weekend's card. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.